Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's fun to be on campus. I don't think I've been back since I graduated. And I live not too far from here. I went to Memorial Drive Elementary, Spring Branch Middle, and Memorial High School. And my nephews and my nieces are all in a line to do the same thing. So I'm very, very connected to this community. So just like Jennifer said, my goal through Define is very much centered around well-being, much more than I think people talk about the physical component, because that's one of the easiest things for us to really connect with at first. But there's so many deeper layers. So I'm gonna ask you a question and just play with me for a second. All right. So I'm gonna give you a superhuman power, and you have to choose one of them, all right? The red cape is that you can fight anything. You can fight illness, you can fight crime, you can fight any type of disease, you can fight any type of discomfort or pain, and you can do it successfully. The other cape is the green cape, and it means you can grow whatever you want. You can grow health, you can grow well-being, you can grow money, you can grow entire community of support. How many of you would choose the red cape, the fighting cape? Good. And how many of you would choose the green cape? How many of you want to choose both capes? Yeah. And honestly, the notion of well-being is that we must do both. And actually, the cool thing about all of this, and even in terms of yoga and using your body, it's about building awareness. And it's about building awareness on when you should be wearing a red cape and when you should be wearing a green cape. And sometimes in a split second, you gotta flip them so that it becomes a reversible cape just like this. And so the whole notion of what do we need to mitigate and fight, and then what are the things that we want to grow? And so when we think about well-being, we have to come up with our tool bag of tools that we know what to pull out at a variety of different times. So to talk about my story just a little bit more, I think that it's really, really relevant to say that growing up, we think of school as a very centered place it's 30 to 35 plus hours of our lives as students are spent at that time. So I'm gonna ask you one other question about this. What, in 2 words or less, do you want for your child? Do you want for your children? And if I could get a couple people to actually say some things. 2 words or less, what are some things that you want for your children?
Happiness.
Happiness.
Success.
Success.
Strong mind.
Strong mind.
Confidence.
Confidence.
Grit.
Exactly. And what are some of the things that are taught in school?
Physics.
So the thing about it that's very interesting is that we spend a lot of our lives on achievement, right? And we specifically do that by focusing on our skills and our knowledge. But if skills plus knowledge without well-being exists, then we're not very satisfied in lives. And in fact, this is a lot of the research that shows why there's such an increased stress, anxiety, and what used to be that stress and anxiety peaked at around 26 in terms of developmental stress, it now is starting at the age of 13. And it's because of the fact that over the past 70 years, there's been a huge shift, right, in terms of how we are approaching well-being. So I'm gonna talk today about the concept of languishing, and on the opposite side of the spectrum is this concept of thriving. And then what is in the middle? Well, it's exactly what you just said. It's about grit, but it's about resiliency and resilience. Because essentially what we're trying to figure out is how can we teach lessons of resiliency in order to help us to thrive? Because there are all times in lives when we are languishing. And so to define these terms just a little bit more, languishing is essentially struggling with chronic psychological or even psychosocial stresses, poor social relationships, or even academic failures, right? In terms of resiliency, we're defining this as the ability to navigate adversity and to grow in the face of challenges. And when it comes to thriving, there's these 5 main criteria that we're looking at. It's positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, as well as accomplishment. So accomplishment is a part of this. Success is a part of this. We have to feel like we are able to be very coherent and competent in something for us to be able to thrive. And I'm happy to share these slides, FYI, as well, if anyone is wanting. If like I see someone taking a photo, if you can't see that, because I'm happy to send that. So this is me, and this is what I used to do. I used to be a springboard platform diver, and I did this for 13 years, which now seems like a really short time, but when you're doing it from like 9 to 22 years old, it seems like a really long time of your life. And I honestly give this a lot of credit because this is the thing that I think taught me the most resilience in my life was actually this sport. It's actually a very mentally challenging sport, diving off of a 10-meter platform, but it was physically challenging. So physically challenging that I actually broke my spine. And I did that when I was stress fractured when I was 17 years old, and then it just really got progressively worse throughout college. Because of that, I took my first yoga class. And I honestly hated it. The very first class I took, I was not happy. I was like shaking, sweating, and I wasn't even moving. And everyone else seemed to know what they were doing. But I ended up sleeping really well, and I woke up the next morning and I felt great. And so I said, you know what, I'm gonna give it a go. I'm gonna go back. And another reason why I kept going back is that a doctor said, you know, you need to have a spinal fusion surgery. It's time, it's moved significantly. We have to stabilize it. He said, the other doctor might tell you to do yoga and Pilates, so go and talk to him. So I went to this other doctor, and sure enough, he said, do yoga, do Pilates. And he said, try to prolong having surgery for as long as you possibly can, because once you have 3 of your vertebrae fused, the rest of the spinal column will have a negative impact because it's getting so much weight. And then you'll have to have a fusion probably another 10 years, maybe another 7 years, and so you're working your way up your spine. So I was very incentivized to give this a go. So it was by force that I learned how to be somewhat resilient through yoga. So that's what led me to opening up Define. And Define was a moment when a professor at Rice said, I want you to not just take a job, because it was 2009 when I was graduating, which was when, now known as the Great Recession. And all of us were very nervous about spending all this money of going to business school and not having jobs. The year before us, I think at the time frame that my professor had said this, 75% of people had a job offer, and we were the opposite. Only 25% of our class had job offers. Further, this said, you know what, maybe this is an opportunity for me to do something besides going into real estate finance, which is what I thought I was doing, but that's when real estate finance completely crashed. And so Define was born because my professor said, don't just take a job because it's there, do something that's gonna define your role in this world. And in that moment, I just knew that all my fears and ego and doubt that had said, you know, it's silly, it's a gym, it's a yoga studio, aren't there plenty of fitness places already? I decided I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna try. And the first 6 months, I think I was like one of 2 instructors, so I was teaching like 25 classes a week. And I couldn't even convince most of my friends to come. They're just like, what are you doing? What's going on? But it ended up being okay. So when I think about physical well-being, that's just one piece of the puzzle, because there's also what's called subtle body in yoga, which is our mind. And there's also the causal body in yoga, which is soul, spirit, love, life, whatever you want to call that. But it's interesting because in all of our lives, it's the mind that we start to experience the most restriction. And it's typically from our fear, right? And our stress and our anxiety that happens. And that's honestly, from the yogic perspective, as well as even what's being discovered in positive psychology, that's where a lot of our health issues start to originate. Over time, we have to start to figure out how all these different factors influence our well-being. So the environment, and we can relate to that. I mean, even including like the temperature of this room. If it's not comfortable for someone, it might be distracting for them, or they might have a negative impact on their well-being. So something as simple as that, or you know, the room when we all heard the sirens, like where did our minds go to, right? It immediately impacted our well-being, partly because we have what's called a negativity bias. We're always concerned, and it's protected us